It is 9:30, so we are going to get started if everyone's ready for our policy committee meeting this morning, and we will start with approval of the August 28th, 2024 policy committee meeting minutes.
I move we approve the draft of the meeting minutes.
I will second.
All those in favor? Great. 1.03, public. Looks like we don't have any this morning, so we will move right along to, I assume we're going to do 1.04 and 1.05 together, the administrative attendance waiver and policy attendance. Yes, we're still here.
Who's driving?
Stay in calm.
So, you're driving?
We get the
Yeah.
stay in calm.
Well, we don't actually need that at all.
Oh,
Stay in the.
That's
Don't
where
do
it's
that.
recorded.
Don't do
Don't do
Are we recording through that?
okay.
So you can see where you're sitting.
New systems, everyone. New system. We're watching. We're still learning.
It's been a minute.
Well, you,
It's our ignorance.
Okay, so there's nothing to look at up there.
No.
Good.
Trust the staff.
All right. Great. So 1.04.
So we 1.04 and 1.05 do come together as a pair, but 1.04 is policy 415, administrative attendance waiver. We previously discussed this on June 26th when it was on for information and discussion. Coming out of that meeting, as staff was working on it, we came to the realization that really the best course of action from our perspective is to decommission 415 and fold it into 430, which is the policy for attendance. So that is the recommendation that staff is making with respect to 415.
I see no issue with it. So I'd incorporate it into 430, so.
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings us to policy 430, which is the attendance policy. This was also presented for discussion on the June 26, 2024 policy committee meeting. The comments from the prior meeting focused really on the 5 days of vacation for students as excused absences, with a recommendation that it be removed and replaced with a parental discretionary leave, acknowledging that families take vacations, but they're not necessarily excused. But at the same time, we're not going to go to the truancy court just because a family takes a 5-day vacation. And then we also had discussion about chronic absenteeism versus truancy. So if you look at the red line version of the policy, you'll now see that it fits into our format. The previous version of it actually slotted into the new format quite well. There weren't a lot of revisions in terms of how things had to be framed. We do have a few clarifications in the policy. And I know Mr. Falls is here, and if you want to talk us through those changes, or
Sure, I can talk through the most pertinent ones at least. We had some discussion last time around the 5 days for vacation being excused, whether we should call it out in the policy or not. And so I was able to do some research with my colleagues across the state. And I apologize, I have it on a spreadsheet and I didn't bring it with me. I can summarize, though, there were more than I expected that do allow for vacation or trips. Most do not call it out in their policy. They consider it principal discretion, and then the principal is authorized to approve that. I wouldn't recommend we go that direction if we want consistency, because I don't think we would want Principal A saying, yeah, I'm approving it, and someone else saying, no, I'm denying that. So where we tried to land, and by the way, most do between 3 and 5 days. And so we're in the window with the 5 days. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that we change the time frame. But what I'm suggesting here is that we make it clear they're unexcused absences. However, they're not considered truancy. And so we would then need to have a code that would be an unexcused absence that we would internally be able to track so that, and we could make it clear through regulation that although it's unexcused, the student has the right to make up the work with that prior consent from the principal. So in other words, it would be on the parent to communicate that up front, that we're taking this trip. It would be unexcused, but the principal then would be responsible to be sure that that's coded in such a way so that the student can make up the work. Because with an unexcused absence, a teacher doesn't have to allow the student to make up the work. We would be carving this out to say, while it's unexcused, the student may make up the work.
For that first 5 days.
Yes, the first 5 days. So I think it strikes a balance of saying, we're going to excuse these days versus we acknowledge you're going to take them. We expect you to communicate up front. Understand they are counted as unexcused absences. However, we are going to make some accommodations for the student and not penalize them as a result of it.
So that'll be language that will be added
That would be in the regulation.
in the regulation. Okay.
And is that where the codes are defined?
Yes.
The absence codes are defined in regulation.
Yes, so, and that mirrors the student records manual. So we can't really add external, what codes we use to report to the state are defined in the records manual. We can have some internal codes that crosswalk to those, and that's what I'm suggesting. While it's unexcused, it would be an unexcused absence that would have a unique identifier for us. But what gets reported to the state is an unexcused absence.
And what happens after 5 days? Other than the teacher's not required to allow them to make up the work,
Again,
so they go 10 days, so they
Well-
go 5 days in the winter, in the first semester and 5 days in the second.
well, then they would be considered unexcused in the normal sense, and that would count toward truancy potentially. And so, again, those that, we had this discussion in the last meeting, those that are going to visit family and doing the extended things, we try to really work with them to do a withdrawal and a reentry when they come back, so the student isn't penalized and the school system's not penalized for those absences either. Because it's unreasonable to expect a teacher's going to provide work for a month for the student. And so those situations we already accommodate. But a family that decided, well, I'm taking multiple trips, they would be unexcused absences, and they would be considered for the count toward truancy.
Can I go back to your previous statement about reporting to the state? So currently, the vacation days are counted as excused absences, correct? And so, and essentially, we are sort of excusing, like, we're trying to find a balance where we're saying we expect you to attend, but also for these 5 days, we're not gonna penalize you. Is there any concern in terms of reporting to the state that this shift is gonna?
No. Because they're counting absences, not necessarily excused or unexcused.
Okay.
And so what I think this does is help to articulate that we're not endorsing you to go on vacation during the school year. Right now, by excusing them, we're kind of endorsing that. And I think it strikes the balance of, we're not endorsing it. We're not going to penalize your child. We'll honor the family for the 5-day vacation, but we're not endorsing it either by excusing it.
And when they get the report card, it's going to have on there unexcused absences.
Is there any action that the state takes after reviewing those reports? I mean, we have autonomy, right, in how we're managing those absences.
As long as,
Reporting it is a different situation, but in how we manage those absences, we have autonomy.
as long as it's done within the boundaries of the student records manual. So, yeah, so again, right now, they're excused because our crosswalk basically says it's the principal discretion. The principal has some discretion about whether they consider other days excused. There's clear criteria for what is excused: illness, death, emergency, et cetera. We can't make that up, but there is principal discretion for unique circumstances. That's kind of how we excuse it now. There isn't a state code for vacation that's considered excused. So again, this better aligns to the state records manual, which is, no, that's unexcused. We're just not penalizing your child for it.
So in statement C here, it says, in this effort to promote good attendance, any student who has more than 5 unlawful absences in any grading period may fail that course, lose credit in affected classes for that grading period. So do we need to change any language there, or is that consistent with what's going to be in the regulation?
So we transitioned from, a while back, from shall to may, because we don't want a student to, they've missed a certain number of days, they have no hope of passing the class. And principals wanted the opportunity to re-engage the student, and because, I mean, let's say that a student is chronically truant, right? What would be the point of re-engaging before second semester if I'm gonna fail everything anyway? And so that may allows that discretion. At the high school level in particular is where it's more, I think, of a sticky situation. And I will say that Dr. Mearshaw has been working very hard with the high school principals and really tracking that and monitoring who are we, the students who are failing, did they legitimately pass the class and were failed because of this?
Because of those absences.
Yes, and she has taken a lot of energy in helping kind of reverse an old mindset of, well, the student deserves to fail. No, they deserve the grade they earned, because the grade should be about learning involved, not about compliance with attendance.
I think the question that as a panel you need to answer with respect to that is, do those 5 unlawful vacation days exhaust those 5 days before you may fail? Because the way it reads now, I take a 5-day vacation, those 5 days, I've now used up all 5 of my unlawful days. And if I miss one more unlawful day, I now may fail it, even though those first 5 days I'm allowed to make up the work and there's some leeway. I think that's the tension, Ms. Allen, you're kind of getting to. And so I think that's a question for you all to decide. Do you want to have grace in 4C as well that says those 5 vacation days won't count towards the 5 unlawful absences, or not, or just no, they count, but you choose to take 5 days that are unlawful and that's it? I mean, that's up to you.
I just hesitate creating gray areas. You know, I think that it's better if it, I mean, I'm not opposed to how it reads right now.
I mean, I guess part of my question would be too, we're saying that teachers in schools under this, the TRIP, will allow students to make up that work. They're gonna potentially fail the class anyways because of those 5 unlawful absences. Why even, you know? So I think that goes back to that tension of if they're passing the class, but these 5.
I get that, and I am certainly open to clarifying that, but I can tell you in practice,
No one's
it
failing.
doesn't happen. In practice, that's not a realistic concern. But I understand why in the policy you might want to spell that out, or at least in the regulation. But that, I will defer to your judgment on that, but it does not happen in practice.
I mean, I guess that's what's important to us, is to understanding in application. If somebody has the 5 that we're basically forgiving, but then they have 3 more, which leaves them 8, we're saying they may, and because we're saying may, that leads to some inconsistency that it's up to the instructor, the educator, to decide, did those unlawful absences impact your, and I mean, I'm wondering, is that
Which is
that
subject
more
to
described in regulation that were in application with educators that, you know, if a student, like Ms. Gallagher said, if they had the 5 unlawful days in which we allowed them to make the work up, so their work wasn't impacted, so maybe they still have an A. And then they miss 3 more days, and now they have a B. But they still have a B, but now they have 8 unlawful days and may fail the course. It just does. It leaves a little gray area for the teacher to say, you know what?
Well, and those decisions are subject to appeal.
Yeah.
To the principal first, and then ultimately to Dr. Mearshaw, so that it's not like there aren't checks and balances available as well.
Right. Yeah, I think as long as we're confident that, because I do understand that, I also like the fact that we're spelling out a pretty firm stance here as a board to our families that, you know what, take your 5, but don't take advantage.
Well, and that may be the reason to keep it the way it is, because we are still trying to encourage students to show up and be present. And if we expand the amount of grace we're giving, you get 5 vacation days, and then you get 5 more before we're gonna fail you. Now you're telling families, well, you can really take 10 days.
Right.
10 unlawful days.
Basically 10 unlawful days, yeah.
So, I mean, maybe there is no tension, maybe this is the position that the panel and the board want to take.
Well, and again, Tom, I guess Tom could speak for middle school, he's sitting right here and my back's to him. but-
This is really a non-issue in elementary and middle. I think there is some tension at the high school level when you're giving credit. So, but like I said, I yield to you, and I kind of like where we are. And I think those are where parents and administrators need to have a conversation around, student success. And if it gets extended, like what we find in the middle school, especially elementary and middle, parents are thinking about the trip that might be to another country. They're going back to their home country for the month of January, because that happens to be in that country, the place lots of celebrations are happening or whatever the case may be. When we know in advance, we can make some decisions about withdrawing students and re-enrolling them. And so that's what we try to do. And then
Sleeping when I said that.
well, no, I'm agreeing with you, but that's the tension we see, where we see a lot of days. Most people are respectful and come in and tell about the 5-day Disney vacation that's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of trip. But I think this reinforces the fact that it is unexcused. We're allowing you to do it, but please keep in mind that we really take seriously those 180 days.
And again, not that it's pervasive, but you wouldn't want a student with some chronic absenteeism, particularly truancy, that then the family says, oh, and we're also going on vacation. But you can't count that. So I think we strike the balance. I can tell you in practice, we're erring on the side of the student.
Okay.
And that, I've watched that happen just this past year with Dr. Mearshaw and some of the situations she dealt with some of the high school principals around the whole failure because of attendance, and looking at those student grades, looking at the work they produced, and providing that guidance. So I am not concerned about inconsistency with that application. There are checks and balances.
Okay, and I think I also, and I appreciate the discussion here, because I would not alter this language at this point, knowing that there are, I don't want to say exceptions, but there are, there's workarounds for these students. I just wanted it to be consistent with whatever we're putting in the regulation too, that that there's no inconsistency there.
Yeah, and there'll need to be some tweaking of the regulation based on if this gets approved.
Okay.
And we can flesh that out. Right now, again, the language in the regulation is may as well.
Okay, all right. Okay, good, thank you.
Just a technical note, I guess, on page 2, under number 4, where the FCPS regulation 400-98 is linked, the link is broken. It is correct on the list of associated regulations at the bottom. And then a question about, so we don't have any definitions in this policy, but the regulation has a decently robust definition list of like chronically absent, truancy. I'm wondering if maybe we just pull over some of those, not necessarily all of them, or if it lives in the regulation, but.
I've not done the crosswalk, but we wouldn't put a definition into the policy if it's not used in the policy.
Okay.
And so there may be definitions, and it may be that there are some definitions that do belong, but there may be definitions that only exist in the regulation because that term's only used in the regulation.
Okay.
But we can certainly do that crosswalk and pull
So
any
truancy
term.
is used, for
Sure.
example, and so maybe just defining what our
Yeah.
meaning of
Or
truancy.
unlawful absence.
Or unlawful, I was thinking of unlawful absence, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that might make sense to pull over.
So then the next area that I would want to highlight is on page 3, where with the language of the administrative attendance waiver, I tried to clarify that and break this out so that it is more clear that a high school administrative attendance waiver is different than a modified day. And so the high school administrative attendance waiver is what we discussed in the previous meeting, where the student, for legitimate reasons, has earned the credits necessary and has met graduation criteria, and they still have a semester to go. And so they have a job and they want to work, or there's family commitments that they need to attend to. And so that is a process that is already in place, but I wanted to clarify the high school administrative attendance waiver and then the modified day, which Dr. Dyson had directed an SOP on, and so there is a standard operating procedure that is governing that process now. And so I wanted to reference that in here as well, without going into too much detail about it. And that's pretty much it that has changed since the last time we discussed it.
Is that what's actually applied when you hear about, you know, some of our athletes graduate early and go on to college? Is it actually an administrative attendance waiver that they've obtained?
So some school systems call it an 8th semester waiver, others call it a senior waiver, and yes, so they've met the requirements, local and state requirements, and they're granted, you're doing something else that's productive.
They go on and start college.
Right. We have students who do that and join the military, for instance.
Okay.
I don't love the language of personal problems.
Where is that?
It's in the 6A. There may be times when administrative attendance
Yeah.
waiver is necessary. Could we change that to like situations or? I don't
How
know.
about exigent circumstances?
Circumstances,
Or you could, how about individual factors?
factors, yeah.
Just individual factors.
That's good.
It's like,
Yeah, that's a
right,
good-
individual factors. These are factors that affect a person.
Problem.
Right, it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
That language predates me, but I accept that criticism.
Yes.
You do have individual factors.
And I have personal problems.
All right.
So the question for the panel is, move this to the board with the addition of definitions and the modification to 6A, or do you want to see it again?
I think it can go to the board.
Yeah, I can go to the board with those modifications.
So, Steve, you will take care of those edits, or do you need me to?
Nikki will take care of this edit. Thank you. So that brings.
Thank you.
Actually, one other thing, we don't normally do it, but we did include as an artifact and on this item, the COMAR provision on student attendance policy. So you'd be able to see what it is that COMAR expects to be in the policy, and we do believe we cover everything in there. So it's not there to highlight anything other than to say, here's what is expected of us. Now you can bump that up against what we've done.
Great.
Sounds good.
So the next item is 106, Policy 116, Title IX, Sexual Harassment. This is taken out of sequence. This is not a 400 series policy, which we are in the midst of working on. However, it is necessary to bring it forward for further modification, even though it was last updated on February 28th, 2024 by the board. As I think everyone is aware, the federal government has enacted new Title IX regulations. Lots of challenges all around the country about them, but they are still, the new version of the regulations are in effect in Maryland. So we needed to make some updates. The regulations have been updated, and now we're here to present changes to the policy, which is why I have Dr. Sergo and Ms. Nguyen, our HR director, here to talk about all of the wonderful things that we've done to this regulation. Or policy, sorry.
So the changes that were implemented were by the U.S. Department of Education on August 1st of '24. So they changed, obviously, the most significant changes from sexual harassment to sex-based harassment to align with those new regulations that now include gender identity and pregnancy as well in the definition. So as you'll see, obviously a lot of updates to our definitions in Section B. To align with the new definitions that have been incorporated as part of the new policy from USDE. Then there are some minor changes throughout the document in our policy statement, Section C and D, obviously changing the language from sexual harassment to sex-based. That is the most significant piece of that. And then we did update the related information in Section E to align with, obviously, the other policies that we have, as well as the federal regulations and the COMAR pieces as well. Any questions?
So all of the updated definitions, which is like
All of them, like all of them.
portion of the document,
Yeah.
directly from
The federal regulations.
regulation.
So ours is just to align with what they published.
And again, as we discussed with the prior policy, there were some definitions that we had in the policy where the words were never actually used anywhere else. They may have been used in a prior iteration of the policy, which was much longer, but because they're no longer used, we'll pull the definitions out. They don't need to be here.
The U.S. Department of Education we all had to be trained in the summer, and so we all went to training with a consultant, sort of across the country. And then they send to you all the things that your policy has to have in it. And so we made sure that none of it was like specific to our own definitions or our own philosophy or our own anything. It was just what they required. I will say that Title IX has turned out, just generally speaking, over the last few years to be a significant body of work for us. And so we are having conversations with the superintendent, and we've had them with legal counsel about really formally looking at hiring someone to be our Title IX coordinator. We've sort of been spreading that work out among a variety of people. Ms. Wynn sort of is not actually the coordinator. She's considered what's called the decision maker, which is if there are appeals, but we have two main leads, one doing employee and one doing students. We really need to pull those in under one person. And so, we will be talking about how to build a position out to do that, because it is its own full-time job. I mean, those investigations, there's a reporting requirement that's pretty significant in terms of documentation. And, as you see in the superintendent's updates, we do keep you updated. We do have a fair number of them on a regular basis. And just in terms of claims and concerns, not necessarily all documented in terms of evidence of, but a number of people who are exercising their right to file a complaint under the law, so make sure that's clear as well. So we have a regulation that governs that process. Also, through the federal government, they tell you how that needs to look. One of the biggest changes, actually, though, is they took away the time limit.
They did change the timeline. It's a very lengthy process.
Yeah.
Because you do have to consider supportive measures. It's not just a typical investigation, but what it looks like for the people involved, and then giving them the opportunity to review the investigative process and voice any concerns that they have.
What were the limits before?
It was 10 days, which is a very tight turnaround. And when you consider schedules and, pre-scheduled activities, especially for students, it could really impact the investigative process. We were having trouble meeting those deadlines in some instances. And I think, at least from my perspective, I think the philosophy was we want to make sure it's thorough and it's done correctly, and that time limit just isn't giving as much thoroughness to the investigative process that should be contained within it.
What do you think is a reasonable time? I guess it might depend on the complaint, too.
It
extent of
depends.
interviews.
Correct, and also witnesses. If it is a one-on-one interaction and there are no witnesses, that will certainly move a lot quicker. If there are a significant number of witnesses. I'm trying to think, a larger case that I probably had about 15 witnesses. So to schedule the time to get out and meet with all of those and collect their statements, and then based upon what each one shared, you may have to go back to previous witnesses to collaborate if something was said or shared or done. It can be, you can look at 3 to 6 months.
Any other questions? Comments?
Nope.
Concerns?
This is another that's ready to advance to the board.
Yes,
Sounds like
please.
it.
Okay. So the next two items are information discussion only. These are new policies that had not yet been presented to the policy committee. And I will invite, I think I see Mr. Gardner over there, invite him to come join us at the table. I'm not sure where there's another seat. There we go. So the first of the two new policy is the student data privacy, policy 442. This was last updated in August of 2015, so it has some tenure. It has some tenure, and it's a good time to look back at it because, you know, in the last decade, a lot has changed in terms of privacy rights and what's available on the internet and what records are being maintained. So we are here for discussion with the committee to understand what the board's interest is in with respect to student data privacy.
Do you have any initial recommendations of things that you would say we should be thinking about with this policy?
With this policy particularly, one thing I would also recommend the board referencing is also their policy 208 data, which is their data security policy, which was written after this one was written. The Student Data Privacy Act of 2015 was written primarily governing external entities. So a lot of, when it says covered information and operator, which is the definition within the policy, that's defining our third-party services that we use, such as when we outsource, say, our student information system to a third-party vendor. It places a base minimum that our vendors have to meet basic cybersecurity requirements. Subsequently, since then, under the data security policy, and then Maryland passed the local cybersecurity coordination act of 21 and subsequently 22 that require an overarching standards that don't just apply to third-party vendors but apply to the overall organization as well. So the board policy in data security covers both. The written information security program that we have documented and put in place defines the requirements that we have to meet as an organization, as well as the standards that we hold our third-party vendors to. So I'm not sure how the board would like to proceed with these policies, but there is a bit of overlap between the two. So my recommendation, probably rather than having two separate policies, is to maybe combine the two and update both simultaneously. But overarching wise, the governance of our cybersecurity program and data privacy programs is not just something that we deal with third-party vendors on. It is a holistic approach. It is how we operate as an organization. It is from the top down, the board down, a priority to that needs to be focused upon to ensure that we have a fidelity of implementation of the program, not just the program itself.
I agree.
Ted, so the 200 series was cared for, arguably, before Mr. Blivis and certainly I were here, which means it hasn't really been reviewed. And so, given what you've said, would you then recommend, because 208, which is our data security policy, is from 2017.
Right.
Would you be recommending working on some revisions to 208, which would decommission this and reflect that and bring that back to the policy committee in a beefed up 208?
I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Is I think
Okay.
that would be a more simplified approach rather than
Right.
take it all and combine it.
Right, 'cause I'm
and
not sure
then-
208's gotten any attention yet.
Exactly.
Hasn't gotten love yet.
I came in the 300 series,
That's
so
right.
it has not gotten, we've had a couple of policies that needed to be addressed in the 200 series, and certainly because this is tied to the 400, to a 400 series, it would make sense to, if that's the direction the committee thinks we should go, we could certainly bring a 200 series policy forward.
Yeah, I looked at other school systems, 3 or 4 of them, and really, none of them had a policy that looks like this. It all is technology.
Right.
It's
Data security.
Right, it's data security and technology. Around the privacy and the safety of the information and how it's dealt with. But there were some, like Maryland has multiple laws now about protecting student privacy. So I would like to see some of those referenced in there with those definitions, because they do have like 3 pages of, and they get down to the nitty gritty about what's allowed and disallowed and what's considered student information.
And they also state that local school systems have to comply with the Maryland State Department of Information Technology standards in those regards. We have to report
Yeah.
annually our compliance with that now.
Okay.
As a result of the Local Cybersecurity Coordination Act of 22.
Okay. So, yeah, because I did not print it out, but I downloaded it. It was 15 pages of information.
And Mr. Gardner does regular briefs for us around this data, this information changes, often.
Yeah.
And he's really an expert in this area, so I think that would make a lot of sense.
So, does that sound like a good direction? We want to pull 208 together with the
Yeah.
existing.
Yeah. Decommission 442.
And have
I
it
mean,
be
this does
overarching.
deal directly with data that's collected, whether it's written, recorded in the student record, or whether it's held electronically, digitally.
So I think, given the scope of the work on this particular one, I'm not going to recommend that we bring this back in October. I don't think that's realistic. I think realistically, we would look to the December meeting, if we have one. Do we have a December meeting?
Yes.
I can't remember.
There's only one board meeting in December.
I don't think so.
Maybe a
I think we have- I
January.
think it would be January before we have,
January, yeah.
it'd be November and then January.
So I would say January, to give sufficient time for Ted and his team to work with our team to combine these two.
Okay.
So you're saying to present a draft to the policy committee?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And understanding that that is a few months out and things change frequently, but this is a significant overhaul of these 2 policies. This is not just, applying the template and, adding a few definitions. This is going to require some intensive work on the legal side to make sure we've got all of the laws identified and referenced, and for Mr. Gardner's to draw on Mr. Gardner's expertise. I think we do need that time. So I would say if January 22nd, 2025 is acceptable, we will target that meeting.
Sounds good.
That sounds good. We always love to decommission. Things together.
Strengthen the other stuff.
Yeah, I like it when you search something and it pulls up, instead of 4 pages, it pulls up 4 policies, or you search a word and it just pulls up a few policies instead of 4 pages of things.
That would be better. All right, sounds good.
So the next policy is 434, technology acquisition. This is a bit more recent, last revised in February of 2020, but it's, remember when I was doing the roadmap, I was trying to thematically link items, and it seemed like the student data privacy and technology acquisition both fell within Mr. Gardner's wheelhouse, so bring them together at the same time. We're here for the same purpose, to discuss what might be the committee's understanding of the board's interest, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. I know that Dr. Lippy also is here to help support that one as well, and I know he has at least one thought he wanted to share.
I have a question before, but we we could go to that. So why is this in the 400 series, though? I mean, this seems to be an overarching, like, technology acquisition for our system,
Instead of
not
student.
necessarily just student focused.
My guess is that many times historically, I'm sourcing sort of this period of time, principals used monies to purchase technology items for students, right? I can remember as a principal buying Promethean boards, and before districts went to one-to-one, I might purchase Chromebooks on my own. There was this sort of site-based acquisition of technology that could be different school to school. It wasn't necessarily always systemic. So that's my suspicion, and there are others that predate me here that they may know, but it's sort of, when you get money, you predate me in so many ways.
Wow.
I'm just teasing him.
No,
See him
no.
saying something.
Okay, I can take it.
You picked up on it well.
Yeah, but, you'd get money, you'd get donations, you'd fundraise, you'd do all kinds of things in terms of students, and then there had to be, an oversight process to ensure that you didn't go rogue and that you worked with folks on Mr. Gardner's team and things like that. That's what I would imagine.
I think Dr. Sergo is right that it was really directed towards the school's use of technology and making sure it fits in with the larger system perspective that Mr. Gardner brings. But I think you're right that I'm not so sure it still fits there. It may be that this should be a 200 series policy.
Kind of almost even lends why it maybe ought to be a
I was just going to
200.
ask you that. Is there a purchasing policy?
There's a
we can pull
there's a
that?
purchasing, there's a 205.
Regulations,
205?
200-07.
Well, there's I think there's
Fiscal
205.
procedures 205 policy.
We might have changed, the reference to the regulation there is old.
Yeah.
I think we updated it to use the new naming structure to tie it to the policy that it was under.
But, what would typically happen is you'd buy something, and it would just show up at your school. There was no barcoding, there was no inventory. Oh, and then guess what? It wouldn't work. Or you'd need an image, and you'd call his team, and he'd say, "What are you talking about?" And we don't support that, and we don't have, there's no infrastructure for that. So, I think we would catch. Can principals order technology now? Could they go and order on their own? Can they do that still?
Typically.
Okay.
So it's all centralized.
Sometimes. So what we try to do is set a standard, going to the policy we were previously talking about. Every device that connects to the network is a cybersecurity concern. So not only is it, we have the concern of how do we support? We provide technology for instruction. We want to ensure that it's not a hindrance to instruction, it's a benefit to instruction. So we need to have stuff in place that's reliable, that's supportable, that we can provide that level of technical expertise to use and build its function, and secure. So what we've tried to do is establish baseline standards that we can support and secure and maintain appropriately. So in reference to this policy, we have tried to work with the other stakeholder groups in the district to set those standards. However, the decision-making in different regards to the technology selected falls into different areas depending on the nature of that technology.
And I can give you an example of school-based. Right now, the secondary level, 434 is kind of obsolete because students have one-to-one. So it's been an awesome evolution, and so thus it becomes less of an issue. Administrators buy technology typically for adults based on whatever is needed for the program. So if a new administrator is brought into the ratio, there is a package in which someone gets a new job, and part of that is a computer. Where the rub is right now is at the elementary level, because the board limited the number of one-to-one devices, changed the ratio. We are in the process of helping administrators kind of work through that. We don't want to purchase more technology because we want to honor the ratio, and you can probably talk a little bit about this, but there's some tension there because some of these devices were purchased with fundraising funds and other things. So we're going to work through it, but the reality is that based on board policy and, last year's budget challenges, there are some schools that are, working through how do I deal with less technology, even though that's the best way to go. I mean, I think it,
Could a PTA fundraise and say, here's
So we're saying-
$20,000 to buy
we're saying
Chromebooks?
no.
And we're saying no.
Right.
Not
That's one
because,
of the issues that we do run into. Didn't mean to interrupt, but we do run into this a lot, which is when a school decides to buy a batch of Chromebooks, or the PTA decides to buy a batch of Chromebooks for program X in school Y. When it's purchased and donated to FCPS, that technology now becomes the property of the Board of Education entirely, not just for that program, not just for that school. It's in the Maryland State Guidance for Financial Management of PTAs is you can use this to buy technology. We don't recommend it because it becomes the property of the board, and if it's needed for another priority, it is at the board's discretion how it's deployed, not the PTA's. And we don't want to get into that conversation with the PTA because we know what they're trying to do. We don't want to. We don't want to set up an expectation that that will be there, and it might not. The other part is a lot of times people think about the Chromebooks like their textbook, like you purchase them and that's the end of the expense. They're like a car, that's the start of the expense. So every device we buy, the minute we buy it, that's the first expense, that's the initial sunk investment. Now comes the support costs, the maintenance costs, the security costs, all of that, so they actually do the job, function properly, and things like that. So we have run into issues where there have been programs that were stood up using grant funds and things like that. I mean, the intent is right and things like that, but now you as the board need to fund supporting that. And then in 5 years, when that grant is over and those devices are end of life, well, they've got an expectation those devices are still there. So now is the board on the hook to keep that going, or do we take it away? And that puts us in a position of being a bad guy to the board or a bad guy to the staff. So we're in that middle area. So we try and consistently approach it. So when it comes to like school staff, one of the things we've worked with the board on over the past 8 years since I've been here is developing a life cycle replacement, not just for students, but for staff. And right now we're funded to do student Chromebooks and school-based staff. So a new teacher by formula is purchased. We work with SASA. PTI goes out, we purchase the device, we issue the device, and we support the device for that life cycle. And then that additional expense for the planning in 5 years, when that device is no longer able to be supported, to replace it, we handle that portion at the school level. Central office departments still handle their own, but that's what we were funded to do, and that was our mandate, so that's what we've been doing.
So I mean, I think it would make sense to have a policy that addresses exactly
Yeah.
what you just laid out, and that this
Right.
is the expectation of the board in terms of system-wide technology acquisition, and maybe it aligns with the purchasing or whatever, but rather than it being in the 400 series and laying out, exactly what that expectation
there's a
is.
subsection in 205, again, 205 hasn't had any recent attention. I think it's at least 5 or 6 years old, but in the initial development of it was, I think, 2004. But there's a subsection called purchase of goods and services. Single source or sole procurements are in there, emergency procurement, so certainly it would seem to make sense.
So we could potentially just have a section around technology specifically as part.
And we could either, I think repurposing the policy into a 200 series policy would make sense. I think to try and shoehorn it into the policy on purchasing itself, I mean, we could,
Oh,
we
I hear what
could,
you're
we could
saying.
merge them together, certainly, because that's what this is about, is acquiring. But I think we get technology in more than just through the purchasing process. I mean, we just got the 3D printers last year from the Cal Ripken Association for 2 of our schools, so we now have 3D printing centers. But that's a way that technology comes that's not necessarily going to go through purchasing, but it still needs to go through Ted's team in order to make sure that what we're getting is appropriate. I mean, think about if Apple were to decide they want to donate those, what are they, the Apple Visor, is what they call them, the AR goggles?
Oh.
We would not be equipped to take that on. That would be an incredible challenge because we're just not an Apple system.
Well, and I think to me, this aligns with the security policy too, is that we need to make sure that anything that is coming, whether we're purchasing it or acquiring it, meets our security and safety standards too. I mean, that would be a concern.
So if I hear you correctly, you're suggesting we have a technology acquisition policy as a standalone, but in the 200 series, not to embed it in the other, in 205.
That's what I would suggest. And then when we get to the revisions on the purchasing policy, that's where we then cross-reference to, for technology acquisition, see policy 20 whatever.
Okay.
Oh.
And there's a regulation here that is selection and approval of digital tools in instructional programs. So is there, I mean, I know that looks like that has just been,
That's new.
A little different.
That's more geared towards software for the electronic resources that
That
we
was
It's not-
specifically
it's not
targeted
hardware.
towards the instructional, what teachers are putting in front of students and the approval process for that. So those are being evaluated and reviewed for
Got
things
it.
like 7-910 and the accessibility law. We look at it to make sure that they will be accessible by the students reliably and meet basic cybersecurity standards, because they shouldn't be collecting data, but there are some that do, so we do a quick check on that. SASA evaluates it from a student data governance perspective, because they're the ones who own and share the student data from our student information system. So it goes through a number of checks, and that's what that one's describing for just student facing. But organization-wide, the similar is required, yes.
okay.
So I know, Dr. Lippi, cover what you wanted to share? What you
Yeah, I mean,
mentioned to me?
so the one part about that policy versus other policies is that it identifies an individual as being responsible. Where when you look at our purchasing regulations, we have departments that develop those and departments that review. So just as we move that it turns into the department of review versus an individual to align with how we do other things.
So where do we go from here?
This is another one that I think we may need a little bit of time to prepare, and since trying to keep these thematically linked, I'm just going to suggest can we bring this back in January of 2025 as well. This is another that's going to be a fair amount of revision.
Sounds like we're doing a good job on our January agenda.
Right, that'd be a good one. Sounds good.
So that brings us to our last substantive item, 109, cell phone policy discussion planning. The conversation here is not to get into whether we think cell phones or personal mobile devices are good, or whether they're bad, or whether we want to restrict them and how we want to restrict them. The conversation before the board at the last board meeting was very clear that the board has an interest in hearing from a lot of different stakeholders, community groups, parents, teachers, principals, students. We heard a little bit because we did have we had the sheriff's office, we had a couple of teachers, a high school teacher and a middle school teacher. So you've gotten a glimpse of it. The conversation today for us is, where do we go next? Do you want a survey? What do you want that survey to address? Do you want, what groups do you want us to reach out to schedule times with or get in front of, and what do you want to ask them? Because knowing what you want to ask the principals is going to help us know whether we do it at PAC or we do it at a different meeting where principals become available. Or, what community groups you want us to reach out to and how are we going to get there? Are we going to do it through CAC, or are we going to do it at a community listening session and make it a part of that? Because that has a very specific format, right, that we've chosen for those conversations. That's what we're here to discuss today, is what does that roadmap look like? We will take all of the feedback you give us and build out a map to present at the October Policy Committee.
For the
while you're
record,
thinking
I do predate cell phones.
I'm going to throw
While you're
one thing
thinking
into
about
this
that-
conversation, which is, there was a presentation at yesterday's Maryland State
Yeah,
Board.
I sent it to
education.
them.
Okay, so you got,
It was not uploaded into Board Docs because it wasn't available at the time that we were uploading things to Board Docs. But the State Board did have their first real substantive conversation. And you know, building time into our roadmap to allow for the state to decide how they're going to proceed, because we may be doing an awful lot of work to come up with a policy, and then the state decides, here's what the statewide policy is going to be, and then we have to go back to the drawing board.
Did they give any indication? I didn't read that.
I just sent it to you because it was just from
Okay, good,
yesterday's
'cause I
meeting.
was like, well,
Yeah, no, it was interesting because they essentially like sort of did like an overview of the national trends. And so they talked about sort of what patterns they've seen, that basically 14 states have taken action around timelines for local systems to develop policies. There are six of those 13 states, their governors utilize the executive order process to sort of propose what they want that policy to look like at the state level. There's about 8 states who have laws restricting cell phone use. And only 5 of those 13 states actually, the state boards have developed their own policy. So MSD doesn't have a policy either at this point. And it seemed like what they saw was that really what sort of not dissimilar to what we're doing here, which is most elementary schools, it's pretty much restricted across the country. Middle schools, it's a little bit different. High schools is a sort of wide range of practices. But most of them began with parent and teacher surveys. So I think to Mr. Blivis's point, that seems to be the entry point, was getting a sort of the temperature check. I think it's a challenge for the board because you can expect, just like the 2 teachers, you're gonna have polarizing perspectives. But from a policy trend perspectives, some states have coupled this with mental health governance. Some states have coupled this with digital literacy. Not everybody has a cell phone policy. It's integrated in personal mobile device or other technology use. Interestingly, locally, the only local is Montgomery County is the only local district that's actually made it so that social media cannot be accessed on the school Wi-Fi. We have some of those limitations here. Is that right, Mr. Gardner?
students can access social media. We permit social media by exception already.
So they can't get on,
They use their own data.
they
If
can.
they're using
They can just use data, right?
It's within the student
more of a
acceptable use policy for students that they're not supposed to be circumventing our network while they're on our grounds, but with their cell phones, they were
Right.
doing it all the time.
But it's a virtue signal, if nothing else, right? Like that we don't think you should be on these things, and we're not gonna make it easier for us. Look at us.
And Virginia banned cell phones.
It's
It's funny, I had a discussion with
Mentor.
Washington County administrators, and that's what they do. They turn off
There's been a lot of
against
that.
Wi-Fi.
For the parents?
Yeah.
Kids can still use
Look at
their
the
data.
It's right.
Depends on where the school.
Working good in Smithsburg.
I want to bring this back, though, to the purpose of the conversation for today, because we're kind of delving into some of the merits of it.
No,
And we need to really focus on what you got, what the board wants as our path, so we can get you to a place where you can make a decision about a policy.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, from the CAC standpoint, this is a perfect topic, and we are at a perfect time in our committee lifestyle to dive right into this. We've got a new committee pretty much. We've got students, we've got parents, we've got people who are involved in PTA, we've got a lot of different stakeholders at the table, which is super exciting. And our next meeting is in November. So we would love to jump into that. At our last meeting, we talked about going out into the community and kind of telling our new members, hey, this is our job. Like, we're going out talking about these policies and what these things mean to people, and kind of getting a gauge from because we're all from different communities in the county, and to bring some feedback back. So this is we will take this and run with it however we decide is appropriate, but they're ready to go.
So I have a question. Would you be capable of communicating with all your members now to be prepared to come back in November to start having real discussions? We don't wait till November to say, hey, we've been assigned this,
No.
get out. If you communicate with them now, hey, we've decided we'd like you to start surveying your community, your fellow, come back in November ready to begin the discussion.
Yeah, so
I think we need to be cautious about over-survey.
Yeah.
We want to do a really meaningful survey, and that's not to say that an informal survey that CAC might be able to produce wouldn't produce good information, but we have a data team in our system, and they do produce the surveys that we use for things like the climate study and other needs that the system has. I would ask that we allow them to do any survey preparation. I think, Mr. Rose, what you're suggesting is not necessarily that they survey the CAC, but just get the information out there that this is what.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we do a survey and supply it to CAC?
We need to have the accountability team, and Natalie Gay is usually the lead on that, to develop the survey. Because I think, they're very skilled in sort of the art of how you ask the question, right? Which is not, should we have a cell phone policy or not, or should we ban them or not? They'll be able to collect demographic data, which is important. So I think, the level in which someone has children, their own experiences and background, all of those pieces to inform perspective taking when you analyze the survey results, and to say, to really analyze it and make decisions from it.
I think a survey also would allow, if you decide you want to go with some focus groups, for instance, and really get community input in person, a survey would allow kind of a springboard for discussions with the community as well.
I think the listening sessions are also really important to include with that, just because, and I think they need to be in different formats too, because we struggle a lot with how do we reach the people that don't show up to the PTA meetings, and how do we reach the people that don't read the emails, don't read the newsletters. Like, we need those people, and they have opinions too. So I think it's really hard, and it's a challenge for us to kind of get all of the stakeholders' opinions and feedback.
I'm not sure I know off the top of my head our response rate for the school climate survey. I feel like it's pretty strong, it's decent. And we give that in the fall, don't we?
Yeah, so it's late, that's typically, I think, in the window in November.
I'm just wondering, there may be a piggyback opportunity onto that one as well, or an integration, I don't know, just something to talk to Dr. Alameda about.
Response rate if they know cell phones involved.
I would caution against any more than maybe, I was thinking, if you break it down, it should not take any more than 2 to 3 minutes to complete. Like, for most people.
That's what I was saying, maybe we can push it into the climate survey since.
But, do we want to address questions to groups specifically, so the teachers, staff, students, and parents?
And we do the climate survey with all 3 of those groups.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
Makes sense.
Okay. And that goes out in,
So that's typically in the window of November. I don't know, I've not heard this year, but typically we get it, and then the response rate comes back to principals in January.
do you think that would flow well with the climate survey questions that are presented in?
I almost and I hate to say this, but too separate. But I understand what Dr. Sorgo is saying about the efficiency, but I think
people will respond. If they see cell phone, we will get.
The challenge, I think, with combining them is it's going to end up being longer than 2 to 3 minutes to respond, because now you're trying to cover more topics.
And the climate survey serves a specific purpose that I don't know that this marries well with. But you could send them at the same time and ask for people to complete both.
And I think having it as a separate survey also signals the significance to the board, that we're not just trying to shoehorn this into something else, but we're focusing on this one thing.
But I do think it might be helpful to have some type of narrative out there prior to these surveys coming out. Hey, in the next month, we're going to be sending you 2 surveys.
Yeah.
Just so that people don't get confused. And one is specifically because we're looking at creating a policy and we really want your feedback. And the other is to make sure that our KPIs are being met, or however we want to say it. But just to explain that it's not it was really strategic, thought out, that we have 2 surveys.
So, and that was my next point, which is a really good point. I think that people have to understand the purpose of the survey and how the information is going to be used. That has to be spelled out pretty clearly, what the intent is for the data that's collected.
It's a pretty broad topic if you think about it, in the scope of communicating this with our community members. I mean, you know, we sit here and we look at these policies and we know the regulations and, you know, let's decommission this one because it folds better into that one. And we get that, but it's when we leave this room, there are not a lot of people out there that understand like how the depth of what happens here and how that really is important out there to them. So I think making it translatable and just, you know, if you say cell phone policy, everyone's gonna jump on it because it is the hot topic out there. I can tell you right now, like everywhere I go, people are talking about it everywhere. So if you say, hey, this is coming out, you're gonna get more people to fill this out probably than, you know, the climate study, which a lot of people are really invested in too. Don't get me wrong, we do talk about that a lot as well. But I think if you put that out there, you're gonna get people's attention. People are paying attention now after the last couple of meetings and all of that. So I think I like the idea of keeping it separate for sure. And we just have to communicate the purpose. You know, because when you talk about the cell phone policy, well, is it using it or not using it? What can I use it for? What if my math class needs a computer? Like all of those different things. So I think we need to think about how we communicate that to the people we're trying to survey.
It seems that the conversation is starting to take sort of 2 prongs. One is the device and one is social media.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, I think that that's an interesting perspective, right? Which is, are we saying the device is a problem, or are we saying how we use it is a problem? Two different things, right?
But, and then again, too, when we say cell phone, we really do mean personal device. Because we go beyond cell phone.
Watches,
because you're
everything
talking about
else
the
now.
watch, you're talking about
AirPods.
the earpods, you're talking about, you know.
Regulations that we had worked on, we were very purposeful about that because, and even not to limit ourselves with our current definition of a.
What's here.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't know what the next generation is coming with.
There was a push a few years ago which failed, but my guess is it will come back with glasses. Glasses that have.
Back out again.
Are they? That are Siri connected or Alexa connected, and you're able to.
Too much.
Oh, Siri, I'm looking at this screen. I'm looking at this picture in the window. What is that? And it shows up in your glasses.
I'm wearing glasses.
Rip.
I've been watching for a year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what, you know.
I'm not here. I'm in
Yeah.
an alternative.
So can I just give context? I know this is a little bit deeper, but I think this is important, that the new regulation just went in August. And so the speakers were speaking really, because I was here that night, so the speakers were really speaking to previous practice. This is where Natalie and her expertise comes in, but I think it's important to find out, and then administrators were told to give grace during the first term. So I don't know specifically if we're gonna get a pulse on whether the new regulation has had impact yet or not. I can tell you anecdotally at the middle school it has, but it's been improved. Like the 2 middle schools that had it at lunchtime no longer do. You know, and they're saying more kids are going out to recess, right? So I can give you anecdotal information. I can tell you we've had less issues that are tagged to phone fights. But that could be just because it's the first term, right? So typically as the year goes on, things, but I just don't know. I think the questions we ask, and if we can specifically say, here's current elementary, here's current middle, because people out there may not even know.
That's a good point, yes.
I was gonna
To say-
suggest that we do that at the top
Yeah.
of the survey. This
Kind of.
is the regulation as it exists
Yeah,
now.
right, because I think otherwise, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we could even maybe have the survey separate out that I have an elementary child or I have an elementary and middle child. Then those questions are specific to the current regulations, and then maybe suggestions that they would want to see for improvement.
It's all digital, right, so that it can populate those, so depending on what you check, then you can populate a series of questions based on
Make it sound easy, but hopefully Natalie can.
identifying.
The average person doesn't distinguish between a board policy and a superintendent's regulation. And so the experience in our community may actually be that we already have something. And I guess the question is, do we need a cell phone policy? I mean that, you know, because we have this regulation that is essentially already in place. So is it giving this regulation time to marinate and sort of be impactful, and then checking in on how the regulation's going? Because I think at best, the policy, albeit absent an outright ban, would be to direct the superintendent to develop a regulation to govern how we handle them, which we have. So I'm just trying to understand sort of if we're working in reverse, do we actually need something, or do we want something to sort of signal where we are?
Sarah, I think that's a great point, because if the board were taking a strong, or intended to take a strong position one way or the other, that's where I think a policy would come in. But we do have regulation that has recently been modified and can be modified in the future based on direction from the board without a policy even.
So maybe one of the questions that we ask is, does the community, do the staff, do the students see that a policy is needed? Regulations
Or
are
to
in
ask how their experiences with the
Is the current regulation
enough.
working?
Yeah. Is that enough to?
Because it's brand new, it may not yet.
Because I'm not interested in paralysis by analysis, you know, we could,
Yeah.
I mean, we've made an executive action, we've made an executive decision, we've applied a regulation to our schools. It's in place.
Correct.
So
We've already taken action.
Why not just survey, is that working? And if it's not, what changes would you like to see?
Right.
It also, I think, allows you to not get ahead of if MSDE does go a direction. Because honestly, the policy could be a whole lot of work putting together. And as Steve said, that might end up getting scrapped depending on what.
Well, in the legislative session, I'll be interested to see if anyone introduces bills.
Absolutely see someone introducing legislation in the legislature.
And to Tom and Dana's credit, because they did a lot of the work on that, they reached out to a lot of different stakeholders in preparing the regulations. That was not born just out of their two brilliant brains. That was the
Antiquated brains.
antiquated. Well, only Dana, only yours is antiquated. Tom's not.
I owe you.
But they did a lot of work on that, and they did meet with a lot of different stakeholders. And Tom, if you want to just share the list of who all you spoke with, so the panel can understand that this was not, this was a
We
well-worked.
can share this with you if you're interested, but this is the project timeline. Dr. Sergo on December 13th, 2023, with Dr. Alavito, charged us to look at the current regulation and update it, and it ended with August being approved. In the meantime, we had a work group that consisted of 3 principals, 3 APs, 3 FCTA members, teachers from each level, 2 PTA Council of Frederick County, central office staff, and we had 3 meetings that consisted of about 2 hours where we went through the different regulations from around. Interestingly enough, we thought teachers would say get rid of it. The teachers were one of the strongest voices, especially at the high school level, with trying to keep it for legitimate instructional purposes. A lot of it having to do with kids taking pictures of homework assignments or going out. So Chromebooks can do similar things, but I don't know if it's a matter of training kids or whatever, but still it's that ability to keep your phone. Middle school parents were very much wanting to get rid of it totally. For the feedback we got, but that's not the feedback we get from emergencies. So in this world of emergency management, that seems to be a safety, even though the research would tell you that that's not accurate. Parents still feel like that's an insurance policy for them. And then interestingly, elementary school was not really an issue at all. We made it even more restrictive by them not allowing it on the bus. I thought that might be a little bit of an issue to enforce. Not heard a single thing about enforcement at the elementary level on the buses. We did allow it for middle because the transportation time for a middle school student is greater. And bus drivers reported to us that sometimes that entertains them and they're not doing other things. So just the reality of a 45-minute bus ride, being able to put earpods in, or whatever, not earpods, but AirPods into your ears for 45 minutes sometimes just makes the bus ride much smoother and calmer. So that,
I think it's important too that we also had Dr. Bernard take it out to the Student Government Association and review a draft that we had crafted after meeting with all the other stakeholders. And then we got their reflection and feedback as a student body as well on that before we finalized.
All this does is lend me to consider, do we ask them to go to all this work?
I'm not, that's what I'm saying, I'm not sure we need to.
Should we do a survey? Should we do a system-wide survey when we've done all of this legwork in order to do the regulation? I get it that some, in the will of the board, but they didn't get to sit in here and hear that.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting space, so we don't tend to bring forward superintendent's regulations to the board, but I think you did do a presentation on this recently, right? And I guess the question is, does the board want to have an anchor policy? Because really, if you're going in reverse, then your policy would have to basically say a little bit of everything. We believe that, you know, in the research and what this says, we direct the superintendent to develop a regulation to govern the appropriate and acceptable use of personal mobile devices in our schools. You already have that reg, but you'd be signaling that that this is a nuanced discussion. Unless you're going to take a position, the board wants to ban something.
That's even stronger than the position we've already taken.
Exactly, unless you want to ban personal mobile devices.
So that was my question, is why couldn't we fashion a basic policy right now based upon the regulation we already have in place? Bring that base policy back to the policy committee for discussion at the next policy, because all we're doing is gleaning,
You're just signaling.
grinding it
We're
down
just setting,
to the what,
right,
because you've already got the how.
Right.
yeah.
So we're just basically saying in support of, really.
Right.
So why couldn't we just take that regulation, grind it down into a base policy that we bring back to the next meeting, and let's have a discussion about it. Let's get it before the board. Let's let the public know that it's coming before the board. We can incorporate it in our listening sessions. If CAC wants to include it in their discussions as well, we're giving the public every opportunity to weigh in without going, I think about fiscal responsibility too. Those are work hours that we're gonna ask someone to put a lot of effort into, to send out a survey in which, frankly, we already made a decision.
Right, and there's already been 8 months of outreach, so,
I mean, that's why I say paralysis by analysis, I think we'd be better served. Let's put a base policy together based off that regulation, have a discussion here, then vote to take it before the board for one first reading. Let everybody know, publicize that. See-
So
see
in
what
that,
happens.
in that publication or in the publicity of it, would we then attach the regulation so the public is aware of these are our standards?
Attach it as background artifact, yeah.
100%.
I think the voices that you're hearing from are the people who who are on one end or the other of the continuum. I think about, there are teachers who think we should ban cell phones, and there are teachers who believe, let us figure this out. I thought the comments of Ms. Early were really interesting to me. Just because you only hear the one perspective, get rid of them. I thought, she said, we're telling kids they can't self-regulate. And maybe they can with some guidance and some boundaries. And so I think the people who want a policy are typically the people who want a very strong position. And if the board if that's not where we are as a board, then.
And we've already got 2 months of experience. I mean, it's already in force.
I know when I watched that discussion that the board had, the issue of confiscation came up. And
Yeah.
we don't want our teachers in that position. I was watching from home, wish I was here, because our code of conduct clearly spells out teachers don't confiscate items.
Right.
That's an administrator that would
Right.
confiscate and secure the item. And so those concerns by some of the public or teachers aren't legitimate because our code of conduct already spells that out.
And sadly, in talking to some people who are and mostly in this region in private schools, who ban them, and I certainly don't want to engage in hyperbole, but many kids just work around that. They have a burner phone, or a fake phone. If it's a school that has the pocket things that you have to stick them in, a lot of the schools have adopted those
Yeah.
Yeah.
Singers or whatever.
Yes, thank you, yes. You know, or they hide them. They hide them. They don't actually not bring them to school, even when they're banned. So,
The same concept of smoking.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we prohibit smoking, but they're gonna figure out.
I mean, I thought the same thing that you had mentioned, that the teacher mentioned is because I at first was like, just ban the damn thing.
right.
Well, you hear all the stories and it's like, look, you know, like our SRO also gave a
Very powerful
very
testimony.
powerful testimony there. So that one is like, just ban the damn things. But then also I've read articles that said, do we not also as a school system have a responsibility to teach our students proper use of technology for when they're not with us anymore? When they get into the workplace or do we not have a responsibility? What is proper use of technology?
And sometimes we lose sight of that while they are misused, they also can be an asset to us. And when I look at the issue of cyberbullying and kids bullying by text or by social media, to that I say, thank you very much. You created a record for it. Because now we have clear evidence that it occurred. And even when some of the fights and things that are videotaped, we use that video footage when it's provided to us from other students or parents. We utilize that as part of the investigative process. And so it can be an asset too, even though they were using it for the wrong purpose. It can be an asset in correcting and changing the behavior.
I will say one interesting perspective that I had not thought about that a principal shared with me was, what are we going to do about adult cell phone use?
Right.
And I thought, well, what do you mean? Like, you know, that's not what we're talking about. It's like, well, no. You know, I often will have to talk to my staff who are walking down the hallway, you know, taking their class somewhere and on their phone, or I pop in their room and they're at their desk and they're sending a quick message. And so I thought that was another perspective that if you're looking to write something, the question is, who does it govern?
Everybody.
I mean, we tend to talk about kids, but, you know, I'm just as bad as anyone. I mean, I've got 2 phones. You know what I mean? It's not one wasn't enough. You know?
You need 2 phones.
I need 2 phones.
legal
One's
reasons.
personal and one's not. But
You're not in an instructional position.
No.
So I think we
Right.
make that definition. So
Right.
we have to do.
in
some
supervision of students.
Supervision.
Right, but even from
Right.
the certain work ethic. I mean,
Yes.
we are all guilty, and myself included, of multitasking, of, you know, being in a meeting and doing something else, or talking to someone and texting someone else. And so it's also a question of sort of the culture that we want to create around giving people our undivided attention and what that means.
I agree. I do think that we should set expectations, that we as a board should set expectations around mobile device uses. I have one quick question. What is the window for the survey in November?
Climate survey.
Typically, it's like 15 days or 30 days. Well, I think it's less than a month, and then the results come back. It's tabulated in the month of December, and then principals get reports in January that they can use.
Right, and then it's reported on later on.
Correct. Typically, we come to you with KPI reports. I think I've done a couple where I've come and shared. Middle school typically, unfortunately, is the least satisfactory.
And I want to be clear, I'm not sure the survey is open for editing or refinement. It may already be
Oh,
programmed for launch.
I just
Okay.
wanted to know what that
Yeah, yeah.
window was, because if we did some survey, say we decided to go with the
Right.
survey and not necessarily piggyback, but, you know, maybe a survey in the spring would be a better area to really understand the impact of the regulation.
I think that would be incredibly valuable to us.
Yeah.
Getting that impact.
Right. I'd like to see the data that you collected, though. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, the timeline, this sheet, sure.
Yeah, and whatever, I mean, if you can share the feedback that you received from those, if you have a summary or,
We have notes, but I can see we did not do a survey.
okay,
We brought people in and
Okay.
we did listings.
focus group
Yeah.
on it.
okay.
And then they went back to their particular groups, so like the county PTA would take it back to their meeting and then come back. So there's not a survey to share with, I'd be happy to do that.
That's fine.
More reflection of what we were drafting and
Got it.
giving us their
Okay.
responses to that.
So if I understand the map correctly, the path forward, we are going to draft a base policy to anchor the regulation for the October Policy Committee meeting.
Is that reasonable?
Given what you've described are the parameters.
Yes. Don't expect a novel.
The base
No,
policy,
no, no,
yeah.
just the base policy.
The base
that-
policy.
Can you ask that question over here, please?
Well, no, so
Is
far,
that re- is that
He hasn't assigned it to us, so let's.
And then a survey in the spring to understand the impact of the new regulations, which will help guide. Ultimately, I mean, look, the reality is, even if we get this in front of the policy committee in October, we're not realistically presenting this to the board until January or February for a first reading anyway, because of
Right.
the timeline where we are in taking.
Let's do that. Let's get the base policy in here in October. Let's see if we can get it on a January, February board meeting for first reading. The board then might decide, yes, we'd like to go forward with a spring survey or not.
Well, I would actually like to be able to give Natalie Gay, she's.
Yeah, heads up.
Some guidance now that this is something we're looking to do so she can build in time. Because one of my concerns that I ended up not needing to voice about trying to do a survey on the fly was that it's on the fly. And I want her team to have sufficient time to really craft
But to
a
be
well-thought-through survey.
clear, the purpose of the survey is to survey the implementation of the regulations.
Existing regulations.
So she would be able to go to the regulation and begin to craft that survey from there.
Yes, but I want to give her the time to do it. I don't want to ask her to rush. And
Heads up that it might be March or,
Right.
That makes sense.
because that way, that would be good. That way, if the board in January or February says, yeah, you know what, I'd kind of like the survey, then she's prepped and
We've got
early April it could go out.
And by then, we may
Still
have more
target the
direction from the
three,
state.
Yeah.
three
Yeah. The legislative
subject
session will be
areas,
well under.
staff.
Absolutely.
the three different audience groups, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And like they just said, we'll know if legislative action has been filed.
In January, yeah. Well,
So Steve,
there's only like 1,000 bills that get
Yeah.
filed every year.
I promise somebody.
for the
So for us to draft a base policy and have it prepared and ready to upload to board docs for the October 23rd meeting, it has to be ready to upload by October 17, which is achievable. Realistically, we would ask, because of the volume of work through the legal office, that we get it by October 10. So we have a week to do any work that we need to do to finalize it.
What series is this gonna be in? What's the reg in? What's the reg number?
It's 43401.
What do you want us to call it?
That will be part of
Your review.
the review, because we'll have to see if, it may be that we have an existing policy that this could fit into, and then we would, or that we decide to make it a standalone as a 100 or 200.
That's what I was asking, because
series.
if it's not gonna be more, if it's gonna be more than students.
Right. It needs to be.
But you will figure that out, okay.
I think it probably falls into the 100 series if it's a system-wide, because it's not operations the way 200 series is really geared around operations.
Okay.
You know, and 300 is employee personnel, 400 is schools, and 500 is student. So it really, I think, would fall in the 100.
Okay.
Mr. Gardner.
I was just going to throw in, not to circle back and bring this back up, but as the person who winds up doing the digital forensic portion of most of our investigations of students and staff, I just want the board to bear in mind, as we're talking about permissibility, we run into issues of understanding the separation, particularly technology-wise, of separation of work or official versus unofficial. So we have cross-bleed a lot when it comes to that. And so we work with the state police, county sheriff's office, security emergency management, when we're doing these investigations. And so ensuring that the board is consistent on FCPS work is supposed to be conducted on FCPS devices assists, but also the understanding that if you do, if in the course of an investigation, if a staff member is discovered to have performed work on their personal device, that personal device is part of that investigation now. Which means we now have access and are required to continue that thread into their personal equipment. And there's a lack of that knowledge and understanding when it comes to our conducting those investigations. So as we're talking about permissibility, it's fine, but I wanted to make sure I put that in there, because it's one thing if a student is using their personal cell phone and posts something to social media and we're doing a disciplinary action, But when it crosses into the criminal, and I'm getting a call from the police officers to, hey, this kid's missing. Can you find things? And we're scrambling at 11 o'clock on a Friday night trying to do that. Our sort of fence is that what FCPS, we can search up to what FCPS has done, and then if they're using their equipment or if they're using their personal devices in an official way from a staff perspective, then that extends. But there's a lot of that, it gets into a gray area. Steve can definitely speak a lot better than me. But I want to make sure as we were having this conversation that was put out there, because that's part of the reason why.
That it being your own device does not absolve you of liability.
Right.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, that's why I said that's what Dr. Sergo has to have two devices, because I know that the scope of the work that Dr. Sergo does, an MPIA request comes in or a subpoena comes in asking for communications, and she's doing work on her personal device. Guess what? I'm taking that.
Get all my family pictures with it.
Yeah. And we'll give it back. It's going to come back to her, but
They get access.
but it's going to become a part of it. And I do summer trainings for administrators, and as part of every training I did this summer, and I think I got to every principal and most of the APs, I said, look, I know the temptation is there to communicate with families with your personal devices. Don't do it. We have School Messenger for that. We have email for that. We have phones for that. Don't use your personal device, because here's what's going to happen. And I paint a worst case scenario, because that's what I'm supposed to do to make them fear getting their phones taken away from them, which is the outcome.
And part of what gets dropped in that, what was brought up in the survey about like certain course instruction is, our goal from what I've been tasked by the board to do is we want to provide people with the equipment, the technology necessary to accomplish the course of instruction or their job from the board, so that they can do it. If they're filling a gap using their own technology, we have a tendency to, well, we're busy, I can solve this myself, I'll just do it. But by doing it the right way, it allows us to fill that gap. I need to know that those gaps exist. Speaking of the digital cameras, I had a conversation with curriculum and said, well, it's an equity. Like, if there are kids who want to participate in this class, but we don't provide the technology to participate in that class, well, that's not fair for that kid.
Right.
We want to provide the base technology to meet the instructional requirement or the office requirements to do your job or to receive the instruction. Over and above is a different conversation. Like clubs, if there's something special that's permissible, it's no problem. It's that, but we want to meet that minimum baseline. We want to support you doing your job, and we want to support the students getting their instruction. But we can't do that if they don't tell us, if they're just trying to solve the problem themselves rather than communicating and working that. So when it comes to this, if Steve in his conversations is talking to an administrator, it's easier, but let us know that you don't have a cell phone. If you're a principal, FCPS should probably be providing with means of communication if you don't have one.
I'm wondering then, Steve, who do you think should work on the policy and then be included? Because I do think this might go beyond just Tom and Dana in terms of, would you like me to take the lead? Would you like, me to work with Dan, with the group here? What do you think is the right next step?
Let me ruminate on that question.
Okay, and you'll let us know.
and
So
we'll-
no one needs to walk out of here and start writing anything until we hear from you.
Yes.
Okay.
I think perhaps bring it offline to a meeting that we'll have later this afternoon.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. Great discussion.
All right, I think you have to adjourn us, right?
We are now adjourned at
11:03.
11:03.